Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of Comedians Exposed, the podcast where I, Deana Kobe, get to interview fellow comedians about comedy and vulnerability. Today's guest is host of the seasonal podcast, The Goddamn Jets. He lives on the East Coast, also was in the West Coast for a while, so his comedy is across the country. We're so happy to welcome the hilarious Max Antonucci. Welcome, Max.
Thank you for having me, Deanna. Also, let me just update you. I quit the Jets show.
You did?
Yeah, but
But they're
that's
still
fine.
available to listen to, aren't they?
Of course, you could still listen to me try to make a podcast funny about the Jets, which is very hard to do.
The guy, I just like the title saying it. The Goddamn Jets.
Yeah, it's that team. With that team, that title writes itself. You know, they're just always.
I was actually surprised that there's actually someone that willingly admitted to being a Jets fan. So I think that alone was needing to be mentioned. Huh?
It is very difficult to tell people that because you know immediately you're just about to get shit on by somebody else who's a fan of a more successful team. So unless you're like saying it to a Jaguars or Browns fan, no one cares. They'll just be like, "Oh, that really sucks."
Hey, but you're not a bandwagon guy, so
no.
You know, yeah, tried and true. Max is a loyal guy, apparently. So we're
absolutely.
It's so good that you could be here today. First and foremost, can you do me a favor and just tell everybody who listens where they could find you on social media, where you're active?
Sure. So I don't really use Twitter at all, but you can follow me on Instagram at Max Antonucci, my name. And then I have a website that I never update. I never put my dates on there because I'm lazy, but that is maxisyourfriend.com.
Oh, okay. Very good. Well, first, you said you're lazy, Max. Okay. I'm going to defend you here because particularly like doing this kind of stuff, when you're doing comedy, it's not just writing jokes. You have all this other avenues that you could pursue. So it's like, it becomes kind of overwhelming, don't you think? I don't think it's necessarily lazy. I think it's just like you need space and time to do that, right? Or
yeah,
no?
and like updating, updating a site is not like your top priority when your other priorities are like, okay, performing the jokes, writing the jokes, going out to shows or whatever it is. Like all those things are top priority. And then every now and then you're just like, I don't feel like updating my website, even though realistically it would take me 2 minutes to add in whatever show I'm doing and all the details, but sometimes it just seems like such a daunting task that you're just like, I don't feel like doing that.
So why does it feel so daunting?
I don't know. I mean, I just started therapy, so maybe I'll ask her that on Tuesday at 9 a.m. Hey, why am I unable to update my website?
Well, okay, so obviously, Max, the whole podcast is about comedy and vulnerability. It started because I personally am very uncomfortable doing comedy. You know, it's scary. I hate it kind of, but I love it. You know, it's like it really leaves you just kind of like, hey, this is me, everyone. And that's a scary place to be, but it's also a beautiful place to be. But again, that's my experience. But I like talking with other comedians about whether or not my experience resonates or it's completely different. So what would you say for yourself?
I mean, when I first started out, for sure, it was like more difficult being up there, but now it's like I have more of a hard time in real life like opening up or being vulnerable than I do on stage. Like in my relationships and things like that, I just have a hard time I make everything a joke, or I have a hard time being vulnerable or open or giving anyone the power to like really like break my heart or something. That to me is like the hardest thing, as opposed to like going up on stage and saying like your deepest, darkest thoughts or whatever. Like that doesn't bother me at all, because you could have been like, oh, I'm just kidding, it's just jokes. Even though if you're saying something true about, you know, heartbreak or any sort of pain or depression, you could just be like, oh, it's just jokes, and you have that out, you know. Whereas if you're having a conversation with someone in real life
Mhm.
and you say, "Oh yeah, I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling lonely," like that's like a
That becomes, it seems like it's almost like too unbearable because again, you need an out then by saying, oh, it's just jokes,
yeah.
but in reality, everyone knows it's not really just jokes. Like that's where I feel like comedy can be so, especially with what's going on right now with people making jokes and people are like, you're canceled, don't say that. Rah, 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 rah. It's like there's a lot going on because to some level there's, I think, always truth. But I want to ask you, so what is vulnerability specifically for you? Um,
In what sense?
anything, comedy, it could be in life, it could be like any, when you hear that word, when I'm like, Max Antonucci is vulnerable when?
Well, I mean, it depends. So, I mean, to break the fourth wall, you and I did a show a few months ago when I was very depressed and sad, and I had a lot of things going on in my life. And I opened up to you about some things that were happening in my life, and that was a little more tolerable to do than with most people.
Did you feel vulnerable like when we were talking?
For sure, of course, talking about
Oh,
things that are well, one, I always feel guilty talking about anything that's going on in my life because it's like, oh, why am I bringing someone down with my problems or something? Because
oh.
you don't want to be associated with being a buzzkill. Because I've been around people who are just always miserable or always complaining, and the idea of hanging out with them or something, you get like tired immediately just thinking about it. You're like, oh, I don't want to
Yeah.
see this person because then I have to hear all their problems and I got my own things going on. So I try not to do it too much. But
Hmm.
then I have a lot of close friends that I'm friends with, and I'll talk about these things with.
Yeah.
But I also will joke about it too
So what
with
about
them.
the when we were talking, because you said, because I'm trying to think about like your definition of vulnerability. Like what did you think when you were talking to me and it was uncomfortable for you? Like what were you afraid of would potentially happen? The fact that you were burdening with your problems, that guilt would be too overwhelming? Was that what it was? Or was it
Yeah,
something like
yeah, just like
embarrassing,
yeah,
shameful?
just talking about anything just makes me uncomfortable. Like sometimes
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like if I'm talking about like because I was going through some issues, my father had just had a quadruple bypass and he was like depressed with that. And then I had just gotten my heart broken. There was a whole bunch of things going on.
Mhm.
Uh, and I had a hard time talking about that stuff. But you're a kind person. And I was like, oh, I could talk to Deanna about these things.
Thank you so
So
much, Max. No, I appreciate that, but what about for your comedy too? Like, do you utilize comedy then, like for when you're going through all of this kind of hard stuff?
in a sense, yeah, because you write jokes about that stuff. So like, you go through some breakup or heartache or any sort of pain, you turn it into a joke because then you're like, they'll say you're taking power of the situation or whatever, taking control of the situation.
Mhm.
But I don't do it as like, oh, this is me. Take it as just like, oh, this will just be funny and I could talk about it. So I'm not doing it as a like, oh, comedy is my therapy or anything like that. I'm just trying to get the laughs and then that makes me feel better. So it's like the
Ah.
laughs that make
The
me feel
laughs
better.
make you, what about the laughs in particular make you feel better? What do you, is there a need that's getting fulfilled?
Of course, yeah,
Which need?
approval.
Huh?
The approval of others. That's like
Approval
isn't
of
that why we all do
strangers.
this?
I need these strangers to approve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what's better than like doing a show, you have a good set, you get off stage and people are coming up to you and they're like, "Oh, you were really funny." Like that's the best feeling. You're like, "Oh, wow, this is great."
It's so interesting to me though that you chose the word approval. Like I find that to be so interesting. Because again, like people coming off to you, coming up to you after you saying that you did great, there's a lot going on there. So I feel like again, like approval is it's just an interesting choice of word. And it's like it is a nice feeling to feel especially thinking about the current climate that we're living in. Like I keep talking about with comedians about this whole idea of cancel culture. And I really feel like we're throwing a lot of shame around. And it's like the power of wanting to be approved. And it's like how we're wielding with social media the way we don't approve of you.
Yeah.
It's like, what is that doing to our, our well-being?
Yeah, and I think, like, for the most part, I don't I think it's like a very small percentage of people who have ever gotten offended by jokes or anything like that, but they're always the ones who wanna talk about it or, like, go on social media or leave a one-star review at a comedy club because they were offended by a joke. Like, it's a very small percentage of people who are really like that. And to me, it's just so bizarre. I mean, I've never gotten upset about it. Even like people have said some really terrible things to me joking around, where they talk about, whatever the worst things are.
Uh-huh.
And like, joking about your dead dog or, your whatever is happening, if your friends make fun, you don't get really upset at all. So I don't understand.
But
And also,
they're the friends, like what about random stranger, like someone you had no relationship with whatsoever?
I don't think I would get offended, like, in a comedy club. Like, if I were in a comedy club and I'm in the audience and someone was making fun of me, unless it was, like, someone was really just at it like a comedian on stage, just like if you look at a Kramer situation, that one you understand because 'cause you're like, "Where did that come from?" Like, out of nowhere, like, it's so bizarre, and you're like, "I don't understand, like, how you would make that funny." Or how it would be funny in someone's mind to just start going off on a racist rant like that. Like that doesn't make sense to me. Like I understand getting upset about that, but when someone's clearly making a joke or something, I just don't get wanting to cancel anybody.
I don't know. Because I have been talking to, I don't know if cancel culture is real. I don't really kind of buy into it, but I do believe in the online shaming is real. Like
For
we're
sure.
really good at like shaming the shit out of each other, so that's why I think I was like kind of fixated on you saying like, I like the approval of it, because I feel like it's really important. That's what I love about like comedy is like it allows for us to talk about the complexities of humanity in like kind of a way that makes things palatable. But and it is supposed to be jokes. Like every single person that goes on stage, their intention is to be funny, like that's
Yeah.
the end game. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it's, and it was interesting too, because you said that a small percentage of people you feel like go to comedy shows and get triggered. And I'm thinking about like my experiences and I'm like, I don't know, I feel like I've walked quite a few people with, like higher than a smaller percentage, like when I'm thinking about overall with some of my material. And I think especially because certain topics are triggering and stuff. But why do you think for audience members, like if they're going to a comedy show and they're getting so triggered that they're leaving or writing about it or Yelp reviewing, what do you think that's about?
Probably some sort of unhappiness in their own life where they're like, "Oh, I could take this out on someone else." Like they could have some stuff going on at home or they could be going through a divorce or something like that. And now they're just like one thing sets them off and they're like, "This is where I'm getting out my aggression." And they go on Twitter or they leave a review. But I mean, that's just you see it in every business, of course, with when it comes to like stand up or celebrities, people are quicker to not because they want to knock someone down because when you see someone who's like super successful, there's like a weird thing where some people just want to like take them down because they feel bad about themselves or why they are not
Mm-hmm.
in that situation or more successful and it's kind of just like knocking someone down a peg.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where it's, kinda like a cliche, but when they say you live long enough to, like, become the villain, when you have that sort of fame or power and then suddenly people turn on you. They love to see the person come up
Oh, and then watch them fall.
and then watch them
Yeah,
fall, so it's
that's
almost
interesting. Yep.
yeah, and I mean, it goes back, I if you look back on history, there was always things like public beheadings and things like that, and executions, public executions for trivial, like stupid shit, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And people would gather and watch it. And now that's what it is today is people going on Twitter or watching
Yeah.
someone's life get destroyed for a joke, or maybe they have the wrong political beliefs,
I
which
don't know.
is
I
why
think though it does, you're speaking volumes though to the testament of the evolution of humanity, because the fact that if I had to choose between crucifixion or, like getting ripped up, dragged on Twitter, what do you think would be worse? I would
I'd rather
say,
have my head cut off than know what people really think about me. That's like the scariest thing. Like, can you imagine if you could read people's minds and have like know what? Because I have a real problem with people not liking me. Like, if someone doesn't like me or they don't, or I don't know, I'm like, I kind of like am averse to real conflict. Like, I could go back and forth with someone in an audience. Like, if I feel they're being rude or they're being so, like, I have no problem shutting them down or being mean to them, and
Yeah.
I don't care what they feel after that. But most cases, it's like I want people to like me, and I don't like people being mad at me, and or like for anything.
For anything at all.
Yeah, for I mean, unless I truly believe I didn't do anything wrong, and then I'm like, all right, I don't
Okay, so
care.
if
But
someone, yeah, but here's the thing, like to recognize, I feel like there's conflict resolution, right? That, is coming into that. Does that play out like with comedy for you? Like when you're on stage and you see someone and you could feel, and they're the way they're looking at you, you're like, this person doesn't like me. Do you fixate on that person or do
of
you
course.
fixate on the people who, oh, okay.
Oh
Not the
yeah,
people
of
who are like
course.
laughing and like cheering you on?
No, it's always the one person who's not smiling or laughing, and you're like, I gotta get them. I gotta that your eyes just will always go back to that person, and they're like, are you laughing yet? Are you laughing yet? And in your mind, you're just, and everyone else could be, you could have 99 people or 100 people in the room, and 99 of them are laughing, having a great time. And there's one person in the front row who is
Yeah.
just not having a good time. And you're just trying to get them. And,
That
it's,
that could tank your set because I feel like I'm like on that. I'm trying to flip myself. I'm trying to not look at those people because I am so they get in my head so badly, and it literally like I'll just start digging myself in this awful, awful hole. And it's like the power they yield over me. It's very frustrating.
yeah, but sometimes that could be fun. Like to go into it, like I did a show a few weeks ago. I won't say where or who was on it. Uh but the host went up, had a, like a rough set for some reason. He was fine, but it was like late at night, and the whole crowd was just not having it. They were vocal about it, and they were just like, we don't like you. And then the next comic, like he brought up the first comic for the night, and they had a tough time, and they were trying to like win them over with crowd work or something, and people are just being so rude, like in the audience.
Yeah.
And then at that point, I was going up next. I was just like, okay, well, you feel like you're like walking to your execution, like you're walking the plank because you're about to go up there. So I just addressed it, and then I just did material and didn't interact with them at all. And they laughed and they had a good time.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, like people in the front row who were like right up against the stage were turning around to me and like clapping like good, and it was uncomfortable for me because they're like, he was funny. Do you guys? And I was just like, can you not do that? Like that makes me feel uncomfortable. And I'm not saying this is like a humble brag or anything like that. It made me uncomfortable, but you kind of got to know what you're going into. So when
Yeah.
I see someone, like if I see the first comic or two comics are having a rough time, I immediately am just like, fuck this. I'm going to do whatever I want to do.
Mhm.
And the stakes are so low, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because it's like, if you're the only person who bombs on a show and everyone else is just having a great set, it's the worst feeling ever. And you're like, I'm awful. I'm the worst comedian to ever go on a stage. I shouldn't
Yeah.
even be doing this. But when everyone else is bombing, you kind of just, you're like, oh, the stakes are so low, it doesn't matter.
Then I feel like too, there's like camaraderie and like the bomb, like the communal bomb when everybody's
For
bombing, you're
sure.
like, okay, like, yeah, but that is a terrible feeling. Oh my God, to be the only comic that bombs on a show that everyone does well on. That's
Yeah.
how do you get back up? Like, what do you do when that happens to get back up the next day? Like, do you have a conversation or is it just like, oh well, no big deal?
I think it should make you better when those things happen. I mean, now I've been doing it long enough to know, like, okay, that's just, you're always going to feel in the moment or right after, you're going to be like, I'm the fucking worst. I'm a piece of shit. I'm not good at this. But then, the next day you think about it and you're like, it was just an off night. These things happen to everybody, no matter who you are. You're going to
Yeah.
have a rough set. You're going to bomb. And then the most important thing is to just like get up immediately after. Because when I started stand up, the first time I did it, I was like 20,
Mhm.
and I'd done it once. I had a good set the first time I ever did stand up. The second time I bombed so hard I didn't do it for 2 years. So I really started doing stand up, like really started when I was 23,
Yeah.
like in January 2012. That's like when I count myself as starting, even though I had done it a few times previously, but I don't count those times.
Yeah. No, I understand. It's always, everybody has their origin stories of when they're
Yeah.
actually, I took like multiple comedy classes
Oh,
before I
really?
went to an open fucking mic. And it was
Yeah.
like years went by. So takes everybody, it just, for me, it was all about getting over the fear of public scrutiny. Like if there's something very terrible about standing in front of a room full of people and having them look at you. What about, I wanted to ask you though, how do you, especially too, like, cause you do bomb, everybody bombs. One thing too with comedy, it's like sometimes, life gets in the way. And is there something like, again, when you have a show and you had say a lot of shit going on, does that impact your performance? Do you feel like your feelings prior to you getting on stage have an influence of how you're going to be on stage?
No. For me, I feel like when things are really bad, like in my life, or I have a lot going on, stand up is the only thing that's going good. So it's like getting up there, it'll make you feel better for a couple hours. And then, you go home and it's late at night, or, you wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, oh, I still have all these problems. But at least you had the good set, So I've never had it to where if things were going wrong in my personal life, or I was going into a show just not feeling great,
Yeah.
I usually come out feeling better, even if it's for a few fleeting moments.
Is there anything that you do to get in the mood to do comedy, like preparation?
Um, I used to meditate beforehand. So like before a show, I would try to meditate at some point before I went to the place, or maybe in my car if it was somewhere I had to drive to, I would meditate in my car for 10 minutes. And that would usually get me kind of like calm. Also, I load up on nicotine all the time right before I go on stage. Now I have this jewel. So I'm like
Oh,
more addicted to nicotine than ever.
oh no.
So I just like hit that a bunch and then I go up, and
And nicotine is a hell of a buzz.
it gets me, it feels like it gets me like firing off on all cylinders and I'm sharper, but that's all just psychological. I don't think it really does make me sharper or anything like that.
So you don't do you meditate anymore? Of you?
I've kind of fallen off a little bit the
Mhm.
past few months, but I
It's
did just
hard.
start.
Self-care is hard.
Yeah, I've recently went on medication. I recently went on Zoloft, which has been working great, I think, because now I've been going to the gym and stuff a few times a week,
Yeah. Oh,
which is
great.
which
So
is
that's
good.
definitely huge, right? That's a huge, especially because physical activity, I feel like helps. But when you're not feeling good, to get yourself to that point of movement, it's like, you're in a rock and a hard place.
Yeah,
So
it's the hardest thing ever sometimes to actually just get up and do some of these things, even if it's like, I mean, meditation, you're just sitting there with your own thoughts, but sometimes that's like the last thing you
it's
want to do is
right. And it's
be with your own
work and
thoughts.
it's carving out time to like when you don't feel well, to take care of yourself is impossible. And it's super frustrating how hard the process is like finding a therapist. Like you shared how you're seeing a therapist, which is awesome. I am a huge fan of therapy. I think everybody should have a therapist, man, but it's hard. It's hard to find therapists.
Yeah, so I put it off for the longest time because I always wanted to do therapy. I
Uh-huh.
tried once when I was 21 or 22, And the first thing they did was like give me medication that I did not take, like just after one counseling
Session,
or
yeah.
whatever. So I was like, oh, I don't want to see this therapist at all. And then you always hear people when you tell them, oh, I'm thinking about starting therapy. They're like, well, just so you know, the first therapist you meet's probably not going to be your therapist. You're going to have to go through a few of them before you find one that works and all this stuff. So I always kind of put it off. Same thing with medication, because you
Yeah.
talk to anyone and they're like, oh, the first medication may not work. You have to try a bunch of different ones. And every time it's like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, that's when you'll know. So
Yeah.
it's like, geez, so you're telling me if I'm feeling really depressed right now and medication may be the answer, I have to wait 6 more weeks, 8 weeks to find out that maybe this doesn't work and then
Yeah.
go through another 6 to 8 weeks. So it's incredibly, uh, intimidating to have to do all that stuff. But
Mhm.
thankfully, the medication I went on works fine. And the therapist that I found is great too.
That's
She's,
huge.
yeah, she's awesome. So it's like I lucked out
Yes.
on both of these fronts. So it's like, oh, good. Finally, like the things are working out.
Oh my gosh. It's so frustrating though to hear like, yeah, you have to luck out because there's a lot of goobers out there. And again, it's like you need to interview your therapist and all, and again, it's like if you don't feel good to begin with, it's a kind of overwhelming and impossible task. But
Yeah,
also what I think too, it's like the power of, even though it's like slow progress, it feels like initially, it's like once you get to where you're getting help and all of those pieces are in place, it opens up all this other space and you feel so good.
for
So it's
sure.
like the hard work, right, in the moment precedes the bigger picture, which makes me think of like the evolution of joke writing. You have the idea, you write the joke, you got to perform it over and over and work through it. But eventually, when it comes out, it's like, oh, but that shit you have to go through and those faces you have to see of people like
Yeah.
disapproving of what you're trying to do.
That's the worst when you do a joke that is going to work eventually, or it has worked before and you try it and you like switch something up slightly and it just doesn't land. And you're just like, I want you all to know that that is a good joke. It's gonna be a good joke and you guys are sitting through something special but you
Yeah.
don't know it. But obviously you're not going to say that to them because they'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with you, you egomaniac?
No, but that's like, I feel like again, for me, like the way you're talking about therapy and the whole experience is I find so many parallels like with comedy. And
For
especially
sure.
too, like the topics, because I don't know, I wish I was like cool, and
You are cool.
oh no, thanks, Max. That's so not true though. Because I want to like think about things that are just like lighthearted and fun, but I always write about these really uncomfortable things and then they're awful to write about. So what about for you? What are your topics
Oh my
that are
God.
like, I want to write about it, but it's like, no.
Yeah, so I tend to write a lot of dark stuff,
Yeah.
which and it could be weird because like last week I had two spots, like one after the other at New York Comedy Club. So I had one at 8:20 and the other one was at 9:20 at the different location. So I had to like rush down to the East Village after. So the first set that I was doing a lot of like darker material, just about, weird, having strained relationships with my parents and things like that, and all sorts of like dark stuff.
Mhm.
Uh, and it went great. I had like an amazing set. I felt so good. And then I went down to the next show and I pretty much do the same jokes, give or take adding, one or two other jokes into the set. And it was just a weird vibe with everything that I was doing. I was like, oh, they're kind of not liking this. But then you're trying to like kind of get them back with like a little more lighthearted stuff. But it's kind of like you want to do these dark things because you want to make fun of them and make them feel funny. Cause like, I mean, I love talking about death on stage. I think it's a funny thing to do. And I've always been like that because I
Yeah.
have a morbid curiosity about uh, death or depression or,
What I kind of like though is the fact that it's like those are the guaranteed things of life. So why
yeah.
aren't we joking about it? You know what I mean? Like this stuff does happen. And I feel like by not addressing it, it like makes things, there's another layer of mystery, and it's like you're creating
Yeah.
this weird paranoia by not talking about it and not being lighthearted about it.
Yeah, so I've recently been doing this joke where I talk about how my dad was having a heart attack. So he called instead of calling an ambulance, he called me to call him an Uber because he doesn't have good health insurance. So I do this joke about just like how I have to be like, I love my dad, but I also have a 5-star rating, and I know if he dies in the back of the Uber, that's for sure a 1-star rating. So I do this joke, and then it ultimately leads up to me saying that like, I miss my dad. He was a good guy, but I think I made the right choice, by keeping my Uber account in good standing. Uh, and sometimes that one, most of the times it'll hit and it goes well because people are like, oh, okay. But last week, one of the shows I did, people were just like, geez, what, do you hate your dad? Like, people were looking at me with like
Oh
scowls.
my gosh. But I feel like this goes back to what we were talking about like earlier about how like now this, like, again, a joke just being a joke, like there's truth to it, because again, it's like, the truth to it is the fact that you have a 5-star Uber rating. Like that's the
Yes, and
truth.
my
But
dad actually called me to call him an Uber to bring him to the
yeah.
hospital. And the thought that I had in my mind at one point was like, "Oh my god, what if he died in the back of the Uber?" And then a thought did come into my head where I was like,
Right.
"Oh man, I totally get a low rating for that." Because like I like talk to every Uber driver. I try to like be buddies with them just so they like me.
That's impressive. You have a 5-star rating. My rating is
Yeah,
shit.
is it?
It's not, it's not 5 stars. I think it's like maybe like a 4.91, which
Oh,
is
that's
like,
not bad,
is it
right?
though? I don't know. I just feel like, what are you not giving me five? Like you get paid in the money. I sit in your car. I've never peed or vomited or done anything in anyone's vehicle.
To
So I'm
your
like,
knowledge,
huh?
to your knowledge,
Well,
you
I
might
would
have been
hope
blacked
that
out one night.
I don't think oh.
Or it could
All
have been
right.
someone got in the car before you did that and you were the last fare of the night. And then
Maybe.
they're like, it must have been Deana.
I don't like to talk to the Uber drivers though. Because it's like sometimes it's just like they get really, the conversations you get from the Uber drivers is a lot of information, and it's like, wow, I don't
Yeah,
know how
but
to help you.
yeah, before COVID, I always used to just get in the front seat and talk with them because I feel like I don't know, I've got weird things. Like I getting in the back seat of an Uber just seems like such a like elitist, classist
It
thing.
is elitist in classes, but
Yeah.
that's where we're living in. This is part of our world. Like that's what
And
we're moving towards globally, man.
yeah, and I'm just like, I'm not better than you, so I'm getting in the passenger seat. And even though like it's so bizarre to think that way, or it's silly because I've actually driven Uber before when I was in between jobs at one point when I was in my mid 20s,
Yeah.
and I never felt that way. Like, why are you not sitting in the front with me? I didn't care at all. I knew that was the job.
Yeah.
But me, in my mind, it's like I have to go the extra
You
step
gotta
to
be,
let them
wait, isn't it
know.
Max is your friend? Max is the
Yeah,
Uber driver's friend. You're everybody's
yes,
friend.
there you go. I'm just trying to make people like me all the time.
What about you? Are you happy all the time? Do you make yourself happy?
No, not at all. I mean, I get better at it.
Yeah.
Since I moved back from California, I mean, I was in California. I moved out there right before the pandemic, and
Mhm.
they weren't doing stand up really at all throughout the pandemic. Like, not even outdoor shows. It was ridiculous.
Mhm.
So, in that time, I found happiness by hiking every week or going on these road trips, going out to parks and stuff and just having a good time and exploring. And that kind of kept me sane.
Mhm.
And you feel good because you're like, I'm being active, I'm getting outside, I'm with nature. But you come back here, there isn't a whole lot of that. There is some, but there's not as much.
Mhm.
So, when I came back, I was having a hard time with that.
Yeah. It's
Plus, I was
hard.
going through like some heartbreak for like 5 months. So it was a difficult situation.
Heartbreak's rough, right? But
Kind
something,
of.
it'll good come out of it, right? Every time crap happens, there's something good that comes out of it.
For sure. I mean, whenever I go through stuff like that, I feel like career-wise things get a lot better. And I think it's because you start putting more effort into your career. So you get like passed at a club, or you get, more, you get booked on more shows. It just feels like things, and it's really because you're not devoting your energy into
Yeah.
this wasteland of whatever it is. Without speaking negatively about anyone, but but without
You're
putting your
human wasteland. I hate you.
no, I don't. But it's without, you're putting all this energy into this situation that is not good or is toxic. And then once you pull back from that and you start putting it into other areas, you kind of, or you cut out toxic people from your life, then you're starting to kind of have more positivity around you, and you're letting in more positive people. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
which you have to have the awareness that, oh, this person, which it's easier said than done, because you can have the awareness of like, oh, this person's toxic, and this isn't good, but you still keep them in your life because you feel bad or something, or you
You
feel like you
feel
can.
there's so many other emotions. You feel bad, you get something from it, it's
Yeah,
and especially too, like people are super complicated. And I believe like everything is like a spectrum, like people are a spectrum.
for
Like they
sure.
could have toxic qualities, but also good qualities. So it's like, I don't think anyone is 100% toxic, you
No,
know?
just like 85%, 80%. No, I'm just kidding.
That could happen, I'm sure. Like, and there's some people that might be 85% toxic for you, but 100% healthy for me.
For sure.
Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and
And I think it's, you just got to have the awareness and make the right decisions. And sometimes it's harder to make those decisions, but
does comedy help bring you awareness?
oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm hyper aware on a lot of things. I'm like, to a detriment
Our
where,
greatest strengths are also our biggest weakness, right?
yeah,
Hyper awareness is beautiful because it sounds like you're really in tune to others' experiences, but then it also sounds frustrating because then you're like doing that to your own self all the time, which could probably be overwhelming, huh?
for sure. And it's kind of like, ignorance truly is bliss, because if you just don't care about what anyone thinks about you, or you just don't give a shit and you're just living a life of like, oh, I'm just going to have fun and not care about anything,
Yeah.
that's a beautiful thing. I wish I could be like that, but
But then
I
you're also
can't.
kind of the asshole as well. You know what I mean? You're
Yeah.
like, oh, because the only person that matters is this guy.
Of
Like,
of
oh,
course, yeah. So it's like, you got to I think it's important to be kind to everybody, especially doing stand up, because you got to be kind to everyone, because you don't know who's, I mean, unless the person is really just a piece of shit. Like, you see some people, there's a few people in comedy that I've met who I would have no problem being mean to because they're terrible people.
mhm.
And I see the way they interact with younger comics or people who they think they're better than. And you see that and you're like, oh, you're a gross person. I think you should give everyone the benefit of the doubt up front to them and not be rude.
Yeah.
And
And
then,
then you think about how meta it is, because if that person is outwardly doing that, think about what they're inwardly doing. Like, I feel like behaviors, however people perpetuate outwardly, is what's happening within their internal existence.
so you think they're doing the same thing to themselves?
Yeah, hell yeah. And then you think about, like, there's this quote, like Rumi says how the universe lives within us, right? So you think about, if that person is behaving that outwardly, what kind of existence is inside their own head?
Yeah, that's true. But sometimes you see these people and you're like, I feel like I know what's going on in their head, and they think they're like the best person ever.
Yeah.
And
I
that
just think
everyone else,
you're compensating. I think if you have to say things like verbally out loud over and over again, like that means you're trying to negate the voices.
yeah.
I just don't think like, I feel I try to approach people in a very sympathetic way when they're fucking annoying. It's like,
Yeah. Well, that's because you're a very kind person. And that's why I opened up to you outside of that secret weed dispensary location.
that place is terrible. Oh my God. I had such a bad bomb there with this guy with dreadlocks. So,
I had a bad bomb there the last time I went there.
yeah,
It was not good.
it wasn't good. So,
Yeah.
But Max, I want to say thank you so much for being able to sit down and talk with me today. Can you do me a favor again, one more time? Tell everybody your Instagram and
Sure.
plug your website.
At Max Antonucci on Instagram and Twitter, but I never use Twitter. And then maxisyourfriend.com for, I guess, dates if I ever get around to updating my website, which I just don't do.
Do you have any dates coming up that you can plug now for us?
I'll be at New York Comedy Club tonight at 12:55 in the evening.
Oh, okay.
So if this is going out today, yeah, tonight I'll be doing a spot at 12:55. If not, you'll see me there at some point.
Okay, New York Comedy Club for sure.
New York Comedy Club and a bunch of other stuff. Oh, and then I'm going to Spain for 2 months. So if you're in Spain and you want to catch a comedy show, I'll be doing shows in Barcelona and Madrid.
Viva Max Antonucci! Woo! Oh. I love it. That's so awesome. Well, good for you living a great life. Well, Absolutely. Thank you so much, Max, for taking time to talk with me.
Thanks for having me, Deanna. You're great.
You're great, Max. This was super fun.
I had a great time.